You're listening to part 2 of a Barefoot Lawyer Reports interview with human rights activist Kay Rubacek. To listen to part 1, check the link in the description.
Could you tell us about your book, Who Are China's Walking Dead? That has to do with the Communist Party, I believe, doesn't it?
It does, and it is a these are such horrific topics, aren't they? And I think because I've been researching these for so long, I have to be careful because I get desensitized, and sometimes it'll hit you like just then as you're describing. And I think it's really important to take a step back and recognize that these are human beings. This could be your mother, this could be your child, this could be your neighbor. And it's that whole sense of dehumanization, which is what prevents someone from having human rights. And so after making Hard to Believe, I started making another movie called Finding Courage, which was, I wanted to tell a family story. And so this was a family who survived horrific persecution. And that was the main character was someone in the Hard to Believe movie that we'd interviewed. And so went deeply into her story and got some amazing footage inside a slave labor prison camp and all these other things. But what I found was that the victims couldn't explain to me many questions that I had. I needed to know, how could the Communist Party be so cruel? How could the operators of the Communist Party do these awful things, like removing the living heart from a prisoner, knowing that they're in pain and that it's going to kill them, and that often without anesthetic, these types of things. How could someone do that? And the victims couldn't tell me. So I felt that what was missing from that story was the perpetrators. So I took extra time to make that movie and went and found people from former Chinese Communist Party officials and interviewed them. It was very hard to get many of them on camera. Majority wouldn't go on camera. Many of them wouldn't even talk to me, understandably so. And the ones that I did get on camera, it took time to earn their trust, because they looked at me as a young Caucasian female, and they just said, you cannot understand evil. You Americans are too kind. You cannot understand evil. That's how they put it. And to an extent, they're right. And I had to earn their trust. And I think once I told them that I'd been in a Chinese prison, that helped. And my father's connection, escaping communism. Also, my husband's family escaped communism in the former Czechoslovakia for political due to political persecution. So once I told them these things, I think I earned their trust, and to some extent, and then through the questioning, we were able to get them to open up. And in the movie, I just had a few minutes of these mostly men who appeared on Black backgrounds, and one ran multiple slave labor prison camps in China, not just one. Another was a criminal lawyer. There was a judge. There was a former propaganda official. There was a former army colonel, a whole bunch of them. And people said to me after they watched the movie, that one was called Finding Courage, they said, "Oh, I really want to know about those guys." And I said, "No, you don't. you really don't. It's very disturbing getting inside the heads of communist officials, because they are the closest to the regime, and they are the hands and feet of the regime, which is a very dehumanizing regime, and deadly, very deadly." And but I had so many people ask me, "We really want to know the story of these guys." So I couldn't put it into a movie, because every sentence they said, virtually every sentence, needed to be unpacked, because they talked in communist language, which is through a lot of rhetoric and idioms and things that just, to an American, they don't make sense to a Western person. I was born and raised in Australia, but I lived here for 12 years, so I class myself as an American sometimes these days. And what they said, one of them, he was a former police chief in Beijing, and a very, very high-ranking official from China's capital. And in one interview very early on, he used the term, we've become soulless bodies. And I asked the translator, I said, I'm not getting what he's saying here. This sounds disturbing. Can you give me a better translation? She said, walking corpses, soulless bodies, walking flesh. I said, I really don't like this term. Can we use, is this walking dead? She said, yeah, you can use that. That's accurate. And I thought, oh, this is awful. This is awful for anyone to call themselves that. But that's how he described the officials in China, but also a lot of the population that have just been so broken by the regime over these decades. And so I put the stories into a book because a film just wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have kept people's interest. But a book is full of stories and my interactions with them to understand them. And hopefully through my experience, people understand these guys. As I had to unpack what they were telling me. And so that's what this book is, a series of stories understanding the communist mindset.
Yeah. Could you sum up to some extent anyway what you learned from those interviews about what is the communist mindset?
A summary would be, there is no bottom line. And I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of us to accept, because we have a bottom line. Majority of us don't try to kill other people. We don't accept really hurting others. And we people might tell little white lies, or they might cheat on a test or something like that, and they'll find excuses for it. But these officials have no bottom line. If it means killing, you kill. If it means torturing and threatening and harming someone's child or kidnapping someone's child to get what you want from someone else, there is no bottom line. And that's what happens when you have a purely forced atheistic society and you remove the belief in higher power, in a God, and in the divine creation of humankind, and you have politicians trying to remake God, so and trying to play God themselves. That would be the biggest takeaway, where between all these different types of officials, they feel so broken, and it explained so much of the Chinese people today to me, that why they suffer so much and how others can hurt each other so much, because that bottom line of what is a human and how humans should how we can respect our neighbors like we want to be treated. In China, it's not like that, because they have been taught to look down on others and not treat each other as equal human beings, but to see them as animals, as discards, as insects, as lives of grass is one of the names of the chapters, because they are treated as blades of grass that can be cut down at any moment. So that would be my summary of it.
Again, that's so chilling and horrible. But that, I would say, that is just illustrates what communism does. And what it does is it brutalizes the population. And the word brutalize is a perfect word, because it means it turns people into brutes, to brute animals, who then it's just survival of the strongest. And the others are just meat for your table or whatever else. It sees the other person as, if they're weaker, then they're your prey. I mean, it's like a science fiction nightmare kind of thing, where, like you said, there's no bottom line, and there's no respect for the dignity of the person. I mean, all human rights are founded on the idea of the inherent and equal dignity of every human being. And that's why, even if you were taking organs from a death row prisoner who was going to be killed the next day, you can't go in and rip his organs out to be sold to somebody else. Even that person has to be accorded dignity that is their inherent possession. And when you talk about innocent people, and people whose only crime is they belong to a religion or a philosophy that is not communism, to have it done to them, it's an incredible atrocity, but I think it's rooted in the failure to realize that every human being has equal dignity, equal worth, and that we have to respect that. I would just, again, I don't want to go on too long, but I want the listeners to realize that after the Second World War, when the world formed the United Nations and then issued the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that was the fundamental plank, that's inherent dignity of the human person. And the conclusion was that because we had not respected human rights, we had had World War II, and World War II had led to 50 million dead innocent people. And to avoid World War III, which with nuclear weapons would probably be the end of all of us, we had to respect human rights, which means we have to respect the dignity of each person. Each human being has human rights. And in China, it sounds like no human beings have human rights.
Yes, it was really interesting. A journalist for the Communist Party that I interviewed, she said, it really hit home for me when she said, we don't know what human rights are. No one ever taught us. So that definition that you have is I think inherently spread among our society here, and it's taught also through institutions, and it's embodied in so many aspects of our culture. But under the Communist Party, once they had the Cultural Revolution and destroyed theism and Buddhism and all of those traditional concepts, and then they replaced the culture with this atheistic, materialistic culture, then the whole aspect of human dignity and human rights could no longer be taught, and so it's not taught. And that is such a bizarre concept, to think that we wouldn't treat each other as see each other as fellow human beings. And but when you realize that in China they are not taught that way, and that is a fundamentally different aspect, and it's not Chinese characteristics.
Right.
We've got to remember that communism came from Karl Marx and others in the West, and that was imported upon the traditional cultures of China, and it was imposed on them. So it's not Chinese characteristics at all. It's foreign communist characteristics.
Right.
So it's just quite interesting that really hit home when she said, we don't know what they are. We've never been taught.
You've been listening to Part 2 of a Barefoot Lawyer Reports interview with human rights activist Kay Rubacek. To listen to Part 3, check back next week.